Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cup of Jonah. I hope you've all had a nice long weekend there for those of you who were not working yesterday for President's Day. So I was just looking through how far we've come and how far we have yet to go in this first book on God in the Summa, Contra, Gentiles. And we are a little bit over a fifth of the way through already, which is exciting. So that's wonderful. So, Dead Game, good morning. All right, so this one's a bit longer. We're going to split this chapter 20 up into two pieces because it is quite a bit longer. I won't need 3 days like the existence of God, but interestingly, that God is not a body, it'll take us to. Chapter 20, that God is not a body. Of course, please remember to share the stream if you enjoy it, and don't forget to subscribe to phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. Secondly, this evening, Snoop has his podcast at 6 p.m. Here's the Thing podcast. So I think he finishes around 7 most days. He's got about an hour-long episode. So around 7 p.m. EST, I'll probably wait till 7:30 or 8. But I'm going to go live briefly, and because tomorrow is when we begin the fast, so I'm going to talk through just briefly about how, what I've eaten today and kind of and how I'm preparing myself for the fast, and then we'll talk about some other things, like we'll do some initial measurements and weights. We'll just do a weight, but then. At the end of today, because we'll only be doing a protein load today, that you will already start to feel that. So we'll talk about how we feel coming into the fast, and then we'll give a periodic update throughout. But we should be going 5 to 7 days is the intention right now, but we'll see. We'll see how long we go. At least 5 days, let's put it that way. So I welcome you to join me, especially if you've never done a fast, a lengthy fast of any kind before. Dead Game says I think thanks for sharing it. Yes, X is being strange with how it's running the live streams right now. So hopefully that will be changed back to how it was, because it was so much better before. Okay. Enough preambles. Chapter 20, that God is not a body. From the preceding marks, it is also shown that God is not a body. Every body, being a continuum, is composite and has parts. But as we have shown, God is not a composite, and is therefore not a body. Again, everything possessed of quantity is in a certain manner in potency, for a continuum is potentially divisible to infinity, while numbers can be increased to infinity. But every body has quantity and is therefore in potency. But God is not in potency, being pure act, as has been shown. Therefore, God is not a body. Furthermore, if God is a body, he must be some natural body, since, as the philosopher proves, a mathematical body is not something self-existing, since dimensions are accidents. What he means by mathematical body is just the dimensions of something, right? Where we kind of measure something in our mind and give it dimensions according to some rule, a measurement. But God is not a natural body, being immobile, as we've shown, whereas every natural body is movable. God is therefore not a body. Again, every body is finite, as is proved in De Cielo, of a circular body and a rectilinear body. Now we can transcend any given finite body by means of the intellect and the imagination. If then God is a body, our intellect and imagination can think of something greater than God. God is thus not greater than our intellect, which is awkward. Inconvenientes, if you remember, that's the word that this translator translates to awkward. So it's inconvenient. It's just not, it doesn't work. God is therefore not a body. Intellectual knowledge, moreover, is more certain than sensitive knowledge. In nature, we find an object for the sense, and therefore for the intellect as well. But the order and distinctions of powers is according to the order of objects. Therefore, above all sensible things, there is something intelligible among things. Now, every body having actual existence is sensible. Therefore, we can find something nobler above all bodies. Hence, if God is a body, he will not be the first and greatest being. A living thing, likewise, is nobler than any non-living body, and the life of a living body is nobler than it, since it is this life that gives to the living body its nobility above other bodies. Therefore, that than which nothing is nobler is not a body. This is God. God is therefore not a body. You see how he's building on everything that a lot of the chapters are little points that we've discussed up to this point. He's drawing on each and every one of those to strengthen this argument, to show that God is not a body. Then, too, there are the arguments of the philosophers to the same effect, based on the eternity of motion. They are as follows. Now, the eternity of motion, as you remember from past explanation, kind of a side note of mine, is the motion of the heavens. Because there's no decay or change in the motion of the heavens, but they repeat continuously without any decay in the velocity of the motion, but it's also perfectly ordered and continually cycling. There's a perfection to that movement that nothing on earth actually shows, right? So that's what they call that, the eternal motion. They are as follows. In every everlasting motion, the first mover cannot be moved either through himself or by accident, as is clear from the above. Now the body of the heavens is moved in a circle with an everlasting motion. Therefore, its first mover is not moved either through himself or by accident. Now no body moves locally unless it be moved, since the mover and the moved must be together. The moving body must thus be moved in order to be together with the moved body. But no power in a body moves unless it itself be moved by accident, since when a body is moved, its power is by accident moved. In other words, what he's saying here is, like, when I move my body, when I walk across the room, or when I move my hand, my soul, being one with my body, is also moved. But my soul isn't moving itself, isn't itself moved. It is the one moving my body, but it's also accidentally, indirectly, so to speak, it also is being moved. The first mover of the heavens, therefore, is neither a body nor a power in a body. Now that to which the motion of the heavens is ultimately reduced as to its first unmoved mover is God. God is therefore not a body. Again, no infinite power is a power in a magnitude, but the power of the prime mover is an infinite power. Therefore, it is not in any magnitude. Therefore, God, who is the prime mover, is neither a body nor a power in a body. The first proposition is proved thus. If the power of some magnitude is infinite, it will be the power either of a finite magnitude or an infinite one. But there is no infinite magnitude, as is proved in the third book of the Physics and in the first book of De Caelo. De Caelo means of the heavens. That's Aristotle's work on the heavens. But a finite magnitude cannot have an infinite power. Therefore, an infinite power cannot reside in any magnitude. That an infinite power cannot reside in a finite magnitude is proved thus. A greater power produces an equal effect in a shorter time than a lesser power does in a longer time. This is true whether that effect be according to alteration, local motion, or any other motion whatever. But an infinite power is greater than every finite power. Therefore, by moving more swiftly, it should produce its effect in a shorter time than any finite power. Nor can it be in something lesser that still is in time. Therefore, this will be in an indivisible point of time, and thus to move, to be moved, and motion will take place in an instant, of which the contrary has been proved in the sixth book of the Physics. That an infinite power in a finite magnitude cannot move in time is likewise proved as follows. So interesting, just to interject again, it seems a little bit laborious how he's kind of going through all the different options. But again, a small mistake in the beginning leads to a large mistake in the end or further down in our reasoning. He's basically looking at, okay, is it A or B? Okay, it's not B. Now, is it A prime or A? It's not A. It's got to be A prime. Okay, so he's basically deductively eliminating the possibilities, every other possibility, so that all we're left with, again, remotion, all we're left is with the conclusion that God is not a body. Let there be an infinite power. A, let us assume a part of that power to be AB. This part will, therefore, move in a greater time. Yet there must be some portion of this time to the time in which the whole power moves, since both times are finite. Let these two times be related to one another in the proposition of 1 to 10, proportion of 1 to 10. Since for the present argument this proportion will do as well as any other. Now if we add to the aforementioned finite power, we must diminish its time according to the proportion of the addition to the power, for a greater power moves in a lesser time. If the decouple be added, that power will move in a time that will be a 10th part of the time in which the first assumed part of the infinite power, namely AB, moved. And yet this power, which is its decouple, is a finite power, since it has a determinate proportion to the finite power. Therefore, the finite and infinite power will move in the same time, which is impossible. Therefore, the infinite power of a finite magnitude cannot move in time. So essentially what he's saying there is that, if you're comparing the effect of 10 with the force of 1, so to speak, let's say you're adding one apple to a pile, right? You have to do it 10 times. It takes a longer time to do that, right? But then if you change the number of apples you're carrying, it takes less time to fill that that pile of apples to 10, right? So if you carry 5 at once, then it takes you only 2 trips. So the time it takes to complete that is much less. If you take 10 apples, it's almost immediate that you get to the goal, right? But he's basically saying that you can't have an extension over time with that infinite power, because then you'd have 10 apples 10 times, and it doesn't work with the finite and the infinite. They can't be the same. That the power of the first mover is infinite is proved thus. No finite power can move in an infinite time, but the power of the first mover moves in an infinite time because the first motion is endless. Therefore, the power of this prime mover is infinite. The first proposition is proved thus. If the finite power of some body moves in an infinite time, a part of that body, having a part of the power, will move in a shorter time. For the greater power of a mover, the more it will be able to keep up its motion in a longer time. Thus, the aforementioned part will move in a finite time, and a greater part will be able to move in a longer time. Thus, as we add to the power of the mover, we shall always add to the time according to the same proportion. But after a certain addition has been made, the addition will reach the quantity of the whole or even exceed it. so too an addition of time will reach the quantity of time in which it moves the whole. But the time in which it moved the whole, who's said to be infinite, but the time in which it moved the whole was said to be infinite. Therefore, a finite time will measure an infinite time, which is impossible. But against this reasoning, there are several objections. One objection is this: it can be assumed that the body that moves the first moved is not divisible, as is the case with a heavenly body. But the preceding proof is based on the division of the first body. The reply to this objection is as follows: there can be a true conditional proposition whose antecedent is impossible. If there is something that destroys the truth of this conditional proposition, it is then impossible. For example, if someone destroys the truth of the conditional proposition, if man flies, he has wings, it would be impossible. It is in this manner that the above proof is to be understood. For the following conditional proposition is true: if a heavenly body is divided, a part of it will have less power than the whole. Now, the truth of this conditional proposition is taken away if it be posited that the first mover is a body. And the reason is the impossibilities that follow from it. Therefore, to posit this is impossible. A similar reply can be given if objection is made concerning the increase of finite powers. We cannot assume powers in nature, according to all propositions of time, to any given time. Nevertheless, the proposition required in the above proof is a true conditional proposition. The second objection is this: although a body is divided, it is possible to find in a given body a power that is not divided when the body is divided. For example, the rational soul is not divided if the body is divided. The reply is as follows: the above argument does not prove that God is not joined to a body, as the rational soul is joined to the human body. It proves that he is not a power in a body in the manner of a material power, which is divided upon the division of a body. So too, it is said of the human intellect that it is not a body or a power in a body. However, that God is not joined to a body as the soul is, this is another issue. The third objection is this. So there he's just saying that he's distinguishing between the objection is saying, well, just like the soul isn't divided if you take away an arm, then that shows that God wouldn't be divided just if the thing he's moving is divided, if he moves it directly, right? But he's saying that this is confusing issues. We have to address how God is the soul or the form of how man moves his body as part of himself is different. It brings in a whole nother question, and it's complicating and muddling the waters, right? One of my favorite terms in English is literally confusion, because confusion it's not the same thing as being mistaken. Being mistaken is when I think that object A or truth A is actually object B or truth B. I've mistaken one thing for another. That's a type of error. But I love the word confusion because it literally means to fuse together as one, confusion. So when we fail to make important distinctions and appreciate the difference between things that we're discussing, then we've confused ourselves. We're confused, right? Because we haven't made the proper distinctions. The third objection is this: if some given body has a finite power, as the above argument shows, and if through a finite power nothing can endure through an infinite time, it will follow that no body can endure through an infinite time. Thus, a heavenly body will of necessity be corrupted. To this objection, some reply that as far as its own power is concerned, a heavenly body can fail, but it acquires an eternal duration from another being of an infinite power. Plato seems to speak for this solution when he introduces God addressing the heavenly bodies as follows, quote, "By your natures you are dissoluble, but through my will you are indissoluble, for my will is greater than your bond," end quote. The commentator attacks this position in the Metaphysics. According to him, the commentator, so he had these, Thomas had these names for these different great minds. So he called Aristotle the philosopher, Averroes, that Eastern philosopher that we talked about in the past, that he's referenced in the past. He called him the commentator. So it's kind of neat because he has all these names. But what's interesting is, I think I mentioned this before, but whenever Thomas quotes any of these great minds, and he has ample quotes all the time, whenever he quotes these great minds or quotes scripture or anything else, he's always word for word exactly precise to the word, to the character. And so he had photographic memory, because he even said at one point, I just kind of, when he was reflecting on the blessings that he had been given by God of the mind that he had been given, and his gratitude for that, he said, I have never forgotten a single thing I've ever read. How many of us could say that? So it's beautiful to be taught by a man, or to be led through a thought process by a man with that level of clarity of intellect and remembrance, because then he can identify if there are, and bring to, like he's doing now, he's raising all these objections, that all these different sources that he's read, or all these different points of view that seem to challenge the topic on the table, so to speak. He's able to remember them with precise accuracy and address them and consider them, their validity as well, right? So it's beautiful. The commentator attacks this position in the Metaphysics 11. According to him, it is impossible that what can of itself not be should acquire a perpetuity of being from another. This would mean that something corruptible becomes incorruptible, which, according to him, is impossible. Since Averroes answers the objection as follows, all the potency that is in a heavenly body is finite, but there is no reason why a heavenly body should have every potency. For according to Aristotle in Metaphysics 8, there is in a heavenly body potency with respect to place, but not with respect to being. Hence, a heavenly body need not have a potency to non-being. This reply of the commentator, however, is not sufficient. Even if we should grant that in a heavenly body there is no sort of passive potency to being, which is the potency of matter, yet there is in it a potency of an active kind, which is the power of being. For Aristotle expressly says in De Caelo that the heavens have the power to be forever. Hence, it is better to reply as follows. Since potency is said relatively to act, we must judge of potency according to the mode of act. Now, according to its nature, motion has quantity and extension, and hence its infinite duration requires that the potency moving it be infinite. But being does not have any quantitative extension, especially in the case of a thing such as the heavens, whose being is without change. Hence, the power of being need not be infinite in a finite body, even though it will endure to infinity, for it is one and the same whether through that power something will endure for an instant or for an infinite time, since its changeless being is not touched by time except by accident. And that will do for today in terms of the reading there. So obviously there's a little bit of of labor in this chapter, because again, he's kind of similar to the more involved question of the existence of God, where he talks about nuanced philosophical comments of movement and potency. Here he's talking about whole and part, and whether or not a body can have, how a body moves, and these other things that are related directly to this idea of motion, and whether or not a unmoved mover can also have a body, and can he do all of that through that body. So tomorrow there'll be one more response to the above objection, and then he'll kind of, and then there'll be a no, there's two more actually, and then he'll kind of summarize and close out the chapter there, and then we'll move on from asking whether or not God has a body. We'll then turn to some whether God is the same as his essence, and we'll continue down that path. And then in about a week, I think it is, then we'll start to actually ask about, okay, how do we actually give names to God now, and how do we know things about God, and how do we apply these names, and what we can start to deduce and say affirmatively, if we can say anything affirmatively about God. So it'll be good. It'll be fun. So thank you again for joining me here this morning. I do recommend, you should be able to get the text online as well, but I do recommend perusing through, because it was kind of technical today. Tomorrow will be a little bit similar, not as logic heavy as we saw, but it'll be good as we keep rolling through. So I appreciate you spending this morning with me, this cup of Jonah. And don't forget to check out the phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. Also watch for, it'll be a pretty brief live stream this evening. Let's say 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock. So 8 o'clock Eastern time. We're going to go live briefly just to kind of introduce and give a summary of the benefits of fasting, of the strategy of fasting, how to do it safely. And ahead of time, we'll talk about how to break a fast safely. It's good, especially as we roll into spring. Obviously, for Catholics and Christians out there, this is we're coming into a time of penance and prayer called Lent, and it's the time period leading right up to Easter. So we're just preparing our souls for redirecting our focus to the afterlife. So what is the point of all of this? Well, in the Easter mystery, we know that our Lord set down his life and picked it up again. He gave his life for our redemption. And in view of that, the whole point of fasting is to purify our hearts and our minds and to refocus on what's truly important. So part of the reason for the fast, I've been wanting to do a fast for a while now, and kind of lead everyone in that, or invite you guys to join me in that. So it's a perfect time of year for it. If you haven't seen it yet, there's a great episode last Wednesday with Philosopher King, with Jen and Hiram. And we just went through, talked about some of the benefits of fasting and everything. Highly recommend that episode. It's beautiful. But you'll enjoy that. But I also, again, invite you to join me, because not only is fasting incredibly beneficial for your health, but it's also good for the soul, for the mind. So one final point on that, in terms of the benefits to the body. So even if you're not into the religious thing and don't feel like it will bring spiritual benefit, remember, it is a discipline and a denial of our tendencies, perhaps vicious tendencies, to indulge in different pleasures. So it is a beautiful thing from a discipline standpoint to make us better human beings, and have more kind of ownership of our own desires. and hearts, but it's also the health benefits. Just one brief story. I know indirectly, I know a man who, he's the only person I've ever known to have gone through chemo successfully and beat cancer that was stage 4 successfully using chemotherapy. He never lost his hair. He never became weak and frail. How did he do it? He assisted his body through fasting. So his chemo appointments were on Wednesday. He would start a 5-day, 120-hour fast Thursday through the next Monday into Tuesday morning. He would fast, and that would cause all these benefits in his body, so that then he would eat again Tuesday evening, and then Wednesday he would go through his chemo. And he did this every single time that he had chemo. He prepared his body by this fast, and he's the only person I've ever known. He never lost his hair. That's incredible. So wonderful, wonderful benefits physically as well and health-wise to fasting, which we'll talk about a little bit this evening, 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll go live again. And that will be also available on the Substack to everybody, not just the subscribers. So, but I do encourage you once again, please subscribe, phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. Until this evening, and then tomorrow for the rest of this chapter of Cup of Jonah. I appreciate you spending this morning with me. Enjoy the rest of your Cup of Jonah, and we will talk to you later. God bless.